Greetings, productive programmers. So let's go ahead and let's continue our journey here. Now that we have the users store in their user ID when they create a story, let's go ahead and get a fresh start here. Let's delete all of these stories. And you could wipe out your database and rebuild it, but there's only a couple stories here, so I'm just going to delete those manually. I'll come in here and I'll create a new story as new at test.com just to be very explicit. I'll save that and I'll create another one. And this will be number 2, and I'll save that. So these were created by new at test.com. So if I sign out here, log back in as test at test, and we come back here to our user story, and we come back here to our stories endpoint. So now I'm logged in as test at test.com, but I can see the new at test.com users stories here. So I'm going to create some stories here now as test at test.com. So I'm going to create a story here, and I'm going to create another one. And as you can see, I'm able to see both the other users' posts as well as mine. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter this down so that way users who are edited in stories can only edit their own story. So let's go ahead and let's fix that. And if we look really quickly here at our stories, we can see that they're associated with the respective user IDs. So that's how we are going to filter which stories users can see, save and edit. So let's go ahead and let's modify our code to respect that value that's now being stored inside of the stories. So inside of our index.ex, which is the module again that is responsible for displaying what gets displayed here to us as a user, we want to only list the stories that are associated with our user. And if we look inside of the place where we mount the stories, you can see when the index page gets loaded, it actually lists out the stories. So this is the function call for our stories context that gets called to basically list out all of the stories we see here when the page loads. So we're going to modify this function. Instead of displaying all of the stories, we're going to want to display only the stories for the user who's accessing the page. So the way that we can do that is, since we have this socket assigns current user ID, we can go ahead and we'll create a new list stories function that'll list only the stories for the user ID that is requested. So what we'll do, we'll change this. And we'll call this list stories. This will actually take an input of user ID. And then we can rewrite this call here to only grab the stories. So we still want all of the stories, but we want just the stories that pertain to our user ID by doing from s in story where s.userid equals our parameter of user ID. And you have to use this caret here to be able to successfully access the parameter. Let's see, there's an error. It says s.userid equals, so we need 2 equal signs. I made a small typo. So make sure you use 2 equal signs here when you're doing your comparison. And you need to make sure that your user ID from your parameter has that caret there in order to make sure that it knows that that's a parameter. If we don't have that, we're going to get an error, and it's going to say that unbound variable in user ID. And then it provides you the suggestion that you should use that caret. It says use caret var. So you need to use the caret here inside of these queries in order to make sure that you're accessing the variable successfully. So from s in story where s.userid, 2 equal signs, and then our user ID. And so instead of calling the list stories, which lists all of the stories, we're going to list the ones that are filtered to the user ID. So we'll go back to our index.ex file, and instead of just calling list stories here without any parameters, we'll pass this socket assigns ID into here. And now we can actually, this one right now is not being used. We can leave that, we can use this in the future, so we'll leave that. But for now, we're just going to access the list stories with the user ID. So when we make this change here to the index.ex, when the module mounts, it should only load the stories for the current user that's logged in. So let's see if that's working. If I come back here to our page and I restart our server, then when this page loads now, the test.test.com user is only seeing their post. So it says test.test.com. And if I was to sign out and sign in as the other user, your other user will only be able to see their posts. So there's no longer seeing all of the posts. So instead of calling this endpoint, which gives us everybody, we are just filtering this down to the currently logged in user, which again is set by our route. When we authenticate, it sets the current user who is logged in. And again, because this is behind authentication, if we were to sign out and try to access this, it's going to yell at us that we can't access it. And then if I log in at the new@test.com user, then we'll see that this user can only see the new post that they created, new@test.com. So now the users are only seeing what they're authenticated and authorized to see. So they have to be authenticated and they have to have the authorization to be able to see their posts. So this is the first step in our application journey to ensure that authorization is respected. However, I'll show you if I come in here to edit the new user's post, their post ID is stories/10/edit. So what happens if I log out as the new user and I go back to our previous user? So what happens when I log back in as the other user, the test user, and I come into the application and I try to access that stories 10 edit form? It says that I can edit the new user's form. Let's see if that works. Does this work? Let's hit save. And sure enough, it does. And actually it reassigns it now to me as a user, to the currently logged in user. So this is a major problem. So we definitely need to fix that. So although users are only able to see the post that they've created, they can still edit other users' posts by modifying the ID of the story that they're editing. So we have to do some additional steps now to lock this application down just a little bit more and make sure that users cannot access other people's posts. So let's make sure that users can't access each other's posts. We can further lock down these endpoints by going into our stories context here. And where we are setting up our endpoints to list stories, we can also modify the get story endpoint. So what we'll do is right now we're allowing any user to get any story. But if we take a look at the way our index.ex file operates, it says that under the edit section here, it first selects the story ID that is requested. So in this case, when I request story 10, it goes ahead and it gets the story. And same thing with when we try to do something like delete a post, we try to get the story first before, and then we pass that story to the delete story endpoint. So to ensure the authorization, what we can do is we can make sure that users are only able to get the stories for the stories that they're authorized to work on for now. So this is one way we can solve the problem. So in other words, instead of me being able to get a story by simply passing an ID such as 13 up here and get in that story, I'm going to make sure that we pass in our request to get a story, we're going to also pass our user ID. So what we'll do is we'll change this to include our socket assigns current user ID. And I just want to show you that you can actually rewrite this query differently than we did before. So before we accessed it with socket assigns and we access it as an atom, although we can still do that, I just want to show you that you can also access this directly by just doing .get current user, or sorry, .current user, there's no get there, but .current user.id. So you can also access your current user directly by doing this. And I just wanted to show you that this works so you know that both syntaxes are valid. But in order for this to function, obviously, we need to also modify our get story function so that there's a function that can handle two parameters, because right now we can only handle one parameter. So we're going to modify our get story. So we're going to create another one that allows for an arity of 2, which means that it accepts 2 parameters. So arity is how you typically refer to multiple parameters inside of Elixir. And we are going to set it up so it has an arity of 2, so it accepts 2 parameters, an ID as well as a user ID. And then what we can do, we can actually just make this, we can space this out a little bit more here instead of being a one-liner. and we'll request that we get the story, and we'll get that with the story. So what we can do, we can also do this with, because we're just going to need one story, so we can just request repo.one, and we can use a query such as from s in story, where s.id is going to equal the ID that is requested by the user, and the user ID must also equal the user ID that is being sent to the request. So in this case, we'll pass the ID of the story that we want to access as well as the user's ID, and we will verify that we only return a story where the ID also has a matching user ID that is requested. So in other words, we can't just request story 10 anymore. We have to request story 10, and we have to request the appropriate user ID. And since this is going to be, I'll just get rid of this comma here. And since this is going to be, we need to, after the where, we need a colon here. Let's see, hover over this and see what the error is. It's saying that we're missing an equal sign here. Okay, so a couple of syntax errors here because I'm trying to talk and type at the same time. But this will allow us to get just a story that has the story ID and a user ID. And since this get story here, this request is made from our index file, we're going to enforce that these users will only be able to call the edit endpoint or the delete event where they are accessing with the current user that matches their logged in user. So let's go back to our application and let's see what happens if we try to modify somebody else's ID. So in this case, the test@test.com user, if I go to edit this post, it says that this is ID 12. What we can do is just look at our database really quickly. So if I come in here and we take a peek at Postgres, we can see that there's still a story that's assigned to the user 3, and user 3 again and user 3 is a different user, so we are logged in as test@test.com, and user 3 is the new user, and they have a story of ID 11. So let's see if we can now go in here, and instead of editing a ID 12, let's see if we can edit ID 11. And if we try to do that, we get this error. And that's because our application cannot find, when it makes a query to the database here, it makes a query where it tries to find the ID 11 where the user ID also matches our user value 1. And since there's no record where 11 and 1 is true, we cannot access this request. Thus, we cannot edit it. So we've made it where we can only delete stories where our story is assigned to our current user. So if I come back here into my application, I can still delete my own stories, but I won't be able to delete somebody else's. And since they're not displayed here, I don't have to worry about that. Now, if I was to come in here and I was to just temporarily remove this, where we're now able to see other users' posts, then this endpoint here, I could attempt to delete that. And if I attempt to delete it, it'll say attempted to delete. It will basically throw an error. And no matter how many times I click to delete this, it throws this error and I can't delete the request. And that's because this is not assigned to my user. But I'm going to go back here and re-enable our list stories so that I can only see the stories that I've created. And now I know that I cannot edit post 11, for example, and I also would not be able to delete post 11. And it throws an error. It does break. It doesn't handle it gracefully. We could write more code to handle that gracefully, but it really doesn't matter because we don't want users to be able to do that anyways. So I'm not going to go through the nice error handle in there to try to gently redirect the user, because really nobody should be legitimately modifying their edit endpoint to try to edit some other user's endpoint. So I don't really care if it breaks. So I'm just going to leave that as is. And now we have an application that enforces the authorization. So we now have an application with authentication that requires us to log in, and it also enforces the authorization, so that way we have to be the currently logged in user to either edit a post or to delete a post. So this is great. And we also only list out the posts that we've created. So essentially this /stories endpoint now acts as an endpoint where the currently logged in user can edit, create new stories, and they can create new stories, edit stories, and delete stories. And it's basically like a content management system for managing their blog posts. So this is great. And I just want to show you really quickly, in case you discover this on your own, this is just going to be a little bit of a sidebar discussion. If we were to click into here, it brings us to what the show.ex, so the show module here. Sorry, that's not the show module. So under blog, web, live, and we go into the story live, there's the show module here. So in this show module is actually what displays these here. So if we were to click on one of these stories, it takes us to this show module. That's actually what this is. And I just want to show you that if I was to come in here and I was to change this to ID 11, which we should not be able to edit, it does display it. And I'm just gonna, basically in future lessons, I'm going to remove this edit ability here, and I'm going to turn this into like a section on medium.com where you can view other people's posts. So in medium.com, I can come to somebody else's post and I can basically come in here and I can still view the other person's post, right? So their post is publicly available, but I can't edit or delete this person's post. So we're enforcing that we can't edit or delete somebody else's post, but we still want to be able to view other people's posts. And I'm going to turn this show module into the area where we can view other people's posts. I'm going to remove the edit button here that's for that user. And I'm going to make it so this won't function, because this could still function technically. But I just want to mention that in case you discover it and you go, wait, there's still an authorization issue. I'm aware of that, and I will address that in the future videos, as we're going to basically convert the functionality of this endpoint. So I just wanted to mention that so that you don't think that I missed anything or have any questions lingering in your head like, well, why did we not modify that one? You could, in theory, modify that, and we will modify it inside of our show module here. We could modify it so that the get story would only list the story with the user ID. So we could do that same logic here. We haven't done that. So we can basically do that in future videos. But I'm going to modify this so that the page has functionality that can be publicly visible. So just don't worry about that for now, because it will be addressed. So obviously there's still a bunch more to do. So in the next lesson, we'll continue our journey of our application. We'll continue building out that type of functionality. We're going to clean this up some more, and we still have to make it so that other users can see other users' posts. And when they're on their posts, they'll be able to leave comments on other people's posts. So there's a lot more that we have to build into this application. So I'll see you over in the next lesson where we'll continue our journey.